Okay, I came back. I found a very interesting article that just rolled out and last February of this year. And so I would like to take the opportunity to read this article because I find it quite interesting that okay, let's move this over where I can, okay. I find it quite interesting that the race hate issue has increased. The race hate issue was always an issue that came from Europeans. And as a result of that, the repercussion and retaliation was race hate coming from those who had been harmed by that rhetoric that has always come from Europeans regarding other groups of people. And I don't have to explain that. It's self-explanatory who they are. They've been doing it for years. So I'm going to take the time and go over this particular article, The Year in Hate, Rages Against Change. And that year was 2018. This particular article came out in the spring issue, February 20th, and it's the intelligence report. White supremacy flourishes amid fears of immigration and nations shifting different demographics. The demographic has to do with the population change, where European Americans have passed themselves off as white Americans. However, they came from Europe and they came from over 51 different countries in Europe. When they arrived in America, they changed from their said countries' names and country names such as Sweden's, Italians, Germans, Britons, what do you call them? Dutch, French. They all came from all these different countries over there. And when they got here in their minority numbers, they cheated us and they combined all of their small populations into one group called white people. And this is where they had fooled us that they were a so-called white minority. There was, in the 16th century, no white people. It was after they went into a convention and came out that it's called a social convent, because when they walked in that meeting, they were Europeans from several different countries. And when they walked out, they had become white Americans, also known as white nationalists, meaning that they took themselves and they made a pact that they were going to be this one people so that they could create a false majority. And that's how it came about. And those days has ended. And so now the impact of this is that they're having to go back to being Europeans. And so because their populations have fallen off critically. And I have explained that in some other videos, which I will refer you to. But the one that I'm uploading now is called White Extinction Anxiety, Fear of a Black Planet. Go watch it. It's very informative. Surging numbers of hate groups, rising right-wing populism and anti-Semitism, mounting acts of deadly domestic terrorism, increasing hate crimes, flooding, exploding street violence, That was the landscape of the radical right in 2018. Hold on a minute. In the US, white supremacist anger reached a fever pitch last year as hysteria over losing a white majority nation to demographic change and a presumed lack of political will to stop it engulfed the movement. White supremacists getting pushed off mainstream web platforms. Donald Trump's willingness to pass a tax cut for the rich, but failure to build a wall and turn to the left in the mid and a turn to the left in the midterm elections drove deep-seated fear of an accelerating state and Silicon Valley orchestrated white genocide. And this is why when I had that white genocide project page taken down, it came right back up. This explains it all. I have the screenshots to prove it. It goes back years. I still have them. That their group, that White Genocide Project, was taken down and Facebook put it back up. Take note of that, those of you that know me on Facebook that remember this. Even Trump's opportunistic November attack on a caravan of migrants moving slowly north through Mexico were seen as all talks and no actions by the white supremacist and anti-immigrant movements, starting to feel swindled at real Donald Trump. Influential anti-Semitic writer Kevin McDonald tweeted on November 15, quote, he will get slaughtered in 2020 unless he does something serious for his base on immigration. Quote, white nationalist Richard Spencer, who infamously led a crowd of fellow racists at a Washington, D.C. meeting in November 2016 with a toast who raised stiff-armed chants of, quote, Hail Trump, was more blunt. Spencer took to Twitter in November to proclaim, the Trump movement is over and it's time for us to move on, quote. There's a video there, The Year in Hate and Extremism. I will go back to that. These fears and frustrations heightened by U.S. Census Bureau projections that white people will no longer be a majority by 2044 helped propel hate to a new high last year. The total number of hate groups rose to 1,020 in 2018, up about 7% from 2017. White nationalist groups alone surged nearly 50% last year, going from 100 chapters in 2017 to 148 in 2018. But at the same time, Trump has energized, excuse me, I went up too far. Trump has energized black nationalist hate, typically anti-Semitic and anti-LGBT organizations, with an increase to 264 from 233 in 2017. Overall, though, the great majority of hate groups are those that despise racial, ethnic, or religious minorities, and they, unlike black nationalist groups, have a firm foothold in the mainstream. Hold on a minute. The previous all-time high number of hate groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center counted, was 1,018 in 2011, when Rage Against the First Black President was roiling amid the era of Trump. Hate groups have increased once again, rising 30% over the past 4 years, and the last year marked the fourth year in a row that hate group numbers increased after a short period of decline in the previous 4 years. The number of hate groups fell by 23%. Hate groups from 1999 to 2018 shows a increase of of groups through here, and it declined here for 4 years, and it increased again over the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years, as it stated. And there's their graph right there. Let you see the whole graph. Anger turns into actions. White supremacist angry energy metastasized in the 2 weeks leading up to the midterm election, when three radical right terrorist attacks and one failed attempt at a mail bombing spree shook the country, leaving 15 dead. The overall death toll tied to the radical
I don't know that.
right rose in 2018, as well as white supremacists in Canada and the US killed at least 40 people, up from 17 in 2017. Amongst these killings were was the October 24th murder of two black people in a Kroger supermarket by a white man who attempted to attack a Louisville area black church but couldn't get in. Then on October 27th, an immigrant-hating anti-Semite killed 11 at the Tree of Life synagogues in Pittsburgh, 10 days before the elections. Radicalized online, Robert Bauer, who like Spencer had soured on Trump, invited a popular white supremacist conspiracy that Jews are bringing non-white immigrants and refugees into the U.S. to accelerate white genocide. Bauer voiced these lies on the social media Gab forum Gab, a refuge for deplatformed haters. Also, in the run-up to the election, a thankful and competent Facebook-using mail bomber who wanted to go back to Hitler days targeted Trump critics and set the country on edge. The violence was so shocking that CNN exit polls found that three-quarters of the voters said it was an important factor in their votes. The midterm tended to validate hate groups' fears for the future. Many extremist candidates lost, including prominent anti-immigrants and anti-LGBT candidates. Even more angering to hate groups were the dozen of women who an increasingly misogynist hate movement sees as allies to white genocide, elected to the new U.S. Congress, including two Muslims and a senator from Arizona who is openly bisexual. For white supremacists, these newly elected officials symbolize the country's changing demographics, the future that white supremacists loathe and fear. There were, however, some bright spots from extremist Republican Don DeSantis, who has a history of consorting with anti-Muslim groups and making racist statements, is Florida's new governor. Republican Brian Kemp, Georgia's new governor, ran on a hostile anti-immigrant platform, and Representative Steve King, a Republican of Iowa, who has repeatedly regurgitated white supremacist ideas, was re-elected. But in all cases, the margins were narrow, and some in the GOP seemed to finally acknowledge that racism and bigotry might not be a good campaign fodder. King, for example, was rebuked by Representative Steve Striker's Republican Ohio, the National Republican Congressional Committee's chair for racist tweets and comments a week before the election. We must stand up against white supremacy and hate in all forms, and I strongly condemn this behavior, Stryver tweeted. Donald Trump has so far failed to build a wall on the U.S. Mexican border. His administration's hardline anti-immigration and anti-Muslim views had devastating consequences for vulnerable populations. Nativist hate groups enjoyed unprecedented access to the lever of power. Thomas Gaining, AP. Trump still mainstreaming hate. The organized hate movement may be showing signs of disappointment with Donald Trump, but the president, aided and abetted by Fox News, continue to push his noxious anti-immigrants and anti-Muslim idea into the public conscious, fueling fear of a forthcoming white minority country. A few weeks after the midterm, Trump reignited his rants against the migrant caravan, raging on Twitter. There are lots of criminals in the caravan. It was just the latest in the president's long history of uh, denigrating people of color from other countries. Has repeatedly made racist comments about Latinos, starting with the first day of campaigning when he referred to Mexicans as rapists. In January 2018, Trump reportedly referred to Haitians and other black majority countries as shitholes. Longtime prominent white supremacist Davis Duke called those comments the perfect truth on his Twitter feed, and Trump earlier attacked on the migrant caravan, which includes calling Central American refugees from violence, gang members, and part of an invasion of the U.S. aided and abetted by the Democratic Party were straight out of the hate playbook. In August, Trump tweeted in support of white South African farmers whose extremists falsely argued are enduring a racist murder spree by blacks, and he ordered a State Department inquiry into the matter. This propaganda is used by white supremacists as a canary in the coal mine scenario for white people. 3 years ago, it was white supremacist Dylan Roof wearing a patch of apartheid government who cited the white genocide fantasy to justify his mass murder of African Americans in a Charleston church, and in October it was Robert Bauer using the same logic to justify his mass murder at a Pittsburgh synagogue. The mainstreaming of harmful and poisonous ideas has spread to Trump allies, particularly those at Fox News. Tucker Carlson was the source of Trump's South African tweet. He gave wildly incorrect information on the issues on his show, and night before the president's tweet, he also hosted an apartheid apologist on his nightly program in May to discuss the so-called war on white farmers in that country. Carlson has used his program to engage in triads against diversity, transgender people, and especially immigrants. Like white supremacists, Carlson has tied these boogeymen directly to the demographic change. In January, Carlson said Latin American countries are changing election outcomes here by forcing demographic change in this country. Then in November, he said, "It is never true that diversity is your strength." Quote, in another broadcast, he told his viewers, "This is more change than human beings are designed to digest." Carlson's Fox News colleague Laura Ingrams echoed this theme in August. She said, "The America we love and know the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic change has been foisted on the American people, and they are changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like. No wonder Carlson is beloved by white supremacists such as Spencer, as well as Andrew Angling, who runs the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer. In May, Anglin called Carson's show Tucker Carlson, aka Daily Stormer TV, and wrote, "Wow, someone important is reading my articles." Fox News is Trump's megaphone as well as the source of many of his ideas and his own allies. Carlson and Ingram, whom Trump watches religiously, have audience between 2.5 million and 3 million viewers. Most Americans are now fully aware that Trump is emboldening white supremacists and helping to grow their ranks. An October poll by the Public Religions Research Institute showed a majority believe Trump has encouraged white supremacist groups. But he's done more than that. He has installed people with extremist views into his administration, and their views are affecting policy. Echoing the anti-immigration rhetoric of Donald Trump, Navitas hate groups smeared the migrants who sought asylum in the U.S. last year as terrorists and criminals who carried disease. Trump showed now former attorney Jeff Sessions the door immediately after the midterm election, but not before Sessions had left an indelible mark on administration policies during his time in office. Sessions led the charge against migrants, speeding up the migration court systems to make it harder for people to remain in the U.S., referring to himself cases that used to be resolved by the Board of Immigration Appeals, ordering the Department of Homeland Security to refer an illegal border crosser to the Department of Justice for prosecution, and ended a policy that granted asylum to most victims of domestic abuse and gang violence in their country. Sessions, like others still in the administration, has a close relationship with anti-immigrant hate groups, including the Federation for American Immigrants Reform. A number of FAIR former staffers have gone into the administration. Former FAIR leader Julie Kirshner is now an ombudsman for the DSH Citizenship and Immigration Services. John Zadrozny, another ex-FAIR employee, is now with the State Department. Ian Smith, formerly employed by FAIR with FAIR Legal Arms, resigned his position in August at DHS, but only after leaked emails linked him to white nationalists Pete Spencer and Jared Taylor. Other appointees and staffers have ties to anti-immigrant hate group Center for Immigration Studies and the anti-Muslim group Center for Security Policies. During his confirmation hearing, current Secretary of State Mike Pompeo faced questions about his connections to anti-Muslim figures like Frank Gaffney and Bridget Gabriel. Gabriel hate group Act for America lauded Pompeo's confirmation, stating he understands the threat our country faces. The group had earlier awarded Pompeo its National Security Eagles Award. Gabriel has claimed that Acts for America has been granted standing weekly meetings with the White House. Particularly devastating are Trump's immigration policies, pushed by his senior advisor, Stephen Miller, and copies from FAIR and CIS. Miller, who was the main advocate of the Muslim ban, and family separation policy, was close to Spencer when he was in college, and long-standing links to anti-Muslim leader David Horowitz dating back to when Miller was in high school. Whether it is un-Indian ICF raids, abolishing temporary protected status, calling for the end of birthright citizens, separating families, increasing the numbers of detentions, or sending troops to the border, the administration's willingness to enact vicious anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim policies is a travesty of American values. Anti-LGBT movement embedded in the administration. Anti-LGBT hate groups also now enjoy access never afforded to extremist groups by a modern administration. Groups like Family Research Council and Allied Defense Freedom meet regularly with high-level administration officials to further their bigoted policy positions. Former Attorney General Jeff Sessions spoke in a private early in the term to ADF, setting off a firestorm of Freedom of Information Act requests for his remarks from advocacy groups and high-level staffers from ADF has been hired by the DOJ since. ADF is a legal powerhouse that pursues litigations to restrict the civil rights of LGBT people and has pushed to criminalize gay sex in other countries. Earlier in the year, Trump tried to reinstate a ban on transgender people in the military, releasing a memo based on the pseudo-scientific reports created by a panel of experts that included FRC President Tony Perkins, on which Vice President Mike Pence played a leading role. Trump and his administration influenced these anti-LGBT organizations had made additional moves against the trans community. The New York Times revealed in October that the Department of Health and Human Services is attempting to further marginalize trans people by spearheading an effort to establish a legal definition of gender under the Title 9, the federal civil rights law that banned gender discrimination in federally funded programs. The Times noted that the new definition would eradicate federal recognition of around 1.4 million Americans who identified as gender other than the ones they were assigned at birth. Trump also nominated to the judiciary individuals with racist or anti-LGBT track records, including Andrew Oldham, confirmed, and Allison Rushing, awaiting confirmation, both of whom worked with ADF, and Thomas Farr, who has ties to eugenicist organizations and only failed to be confirmed by one vote in the Senate. Under Sessions, the DOJ prepared amicus briefs in support of ADF lawsuits that seek to allow discrimination against LGBT people. Data shows extreme gaining grounds. Most American, including almost half of all white people, have come to see Trump as a racist, according to March 2018 AP-NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll, and a majority disapproved of the comments Trump made after the Charlottesville Unite the Right racist and deadly riot, when he said there were good people on both sides. But at the same time, Trump's words and actions are giving sanction to hateful views amongst millions who increasingly don't have a problem with racism and white supremacy. The University of Alabama George Haley, an expert on the modern-day white supremacists who refers to themselves as alt-rights, estimated in 2018 that nearly 6% of Americans, approximately 198 million non-Latino white people, have beliefs consistent with the racist alt-right worldview, meaning that they broadly believe that politics should promote whites' interests above those of other racial groups. And this isn't just an American problem. Right-wing populism fueled by anti-immigrant fever is exploding around the world, as I showed you in that particular Eurometer, where they're all throughout the whole world, their populations are declining. With extremist candidates gaining in power in countries such as Hungary, Poland, Austria, Italy, and Brazil, research conducted by The Guardian in partnership with more than 30 political scientists showed that 1 in 4 Europeans now vote for populist parties. Back in the US, immigration is where Trump rhetoric is particularly toxic. A Reuters IPOSOS poll from October revealed that immigration is now seen as the top issue for people likely to vote Republican, especially among those who are older and lack a college degree. 23% of Republicans in that same poll said immigration was the most important problem facing the country, up from 4% in January, just 5 years ago. An issue wasn't nearly so divisive because they wasn't aware that they were going extinct. In 2013, the Senate passed an immigration bill with a bipartisan support, something that is unlikely today. Increasing racial polarization, which is an important element of Americans' growing partisan divides, was reflected in the midterm election. House Republicans elected in 2018 represents districts that are more white, less affluent, and less well educated than the national average, as well as more evangelical and rural and blue collar. The Democratic Coalition Center on Minority Young People and College Educated White Voters, a growing different demographic alliance that is seen as pushing a multicultural worldview that enrages white supremacists and Roy's fear of white genocide. Thanks in part of social media, the Proud Boys grew to 47 chapters in 2018. That is Facebook. That is Silicon Valley. Web still a handmaiden to hate, helping it spread. Social media and the web continues to be a powerful tool to accelerate the spread of hate to the mainstream, but confusing still reigns across tech companies over how to police hateful content. The Silicon Valley, though it's now realizing it must tackle the problem, is still failing to invest enough in removing hate from their platform, meaning Facebook. They are not calling it Facebook, they are calling it Silicon Valley. This industry, this industry-wide defundlement over where to draw lines on deplatforming was highly highlighted by the mixed message from different companies over removing infamous conspiracist theorist Alex Jones. Only after Apple CEO Tim Cook took the lead did others follow and remove Jones from their services. Cook has been a leader in ending hate online. Other groups such as the self-described Western chauvinist Proud Boys, a hate group known for anti-Muslim and misogynist rhetoric, were able to stay on social media while engaging in violent street violence in West Coast cities. Only after the Proud Boys was involved in a widely covered street brawl in New York City in mid-October did the group lose its Facebook and PayPal account, but That was too late. The Proud Boys had already grown to 47 chapters by the end of 2018. Certain tech leaders don't seem to understand the seriousness of the hate on their platform, even in the face of domestic terrorist attacks perpetrated by white supremacists radicalized online. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg this year claims that the Holocaust deniers weren't intentionally getting their facts wrong. Holocaust denial is perpetrated by a highly coordinated network of practitioners. Rehabilitating the Nazi regime legacy is just one crucial part of their larger goal to justify and perpetuate anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. Semitism. Facebook itself even hired a PR firm that took its credit to anti-George Soros conspiracy theories, which met anti-Semitism with other forms of hate. Soros, a billionaire who funds liberal causes, was one of the recipients of a mail bomb just before the midterm elections. As tech companies continue to try to clean up their platforms, other sites have popped up to pick up the platforms. Gab is the largest of these alternative sites, with about 800,000 members and 5 million pages views a month. The site has very loose terms of service and is home to countless neo-Nazis and other extremists. It was on Gab that Robert Bauer posted his anti-Semitic hold on. His anti-Semitic hatred and interacted with others who agreed with him. There are other realms as well for those who want to hate. 4chan, 8chan, Discord chat rooms, some Reddit threads, and more. Hate groups themselves still run websites and forums with massive audience. According to Alexa Web Traffic Analytic, the neo-Nazi Daily Stormer site has about 4.3 million page views a month, and the oldest hate site, Stormfront, grabs 2.2 million a month. The rage will continue in 2019. Trump has fueled and exploited the backlash to the country's change in diversity, but he did not create it. For more than a decade, hate groups have been angered and motivated by increasing numbers of non-white immigrants, and that is because they are dying off, and their population started to fall off. And because they haven't been able to grow a 2.1 population growth that is one below 1%, and has been like that for several years, that they have failed to replace themselves. They themselves failed the acuity to survive the planet because they had such low IQs on surviving the planet, thinking that they were privileged to be here. But the universe, aka God, has shown them that he's not playing with them, or it's not playing with them. In the absence of major policy shifts to the hard right, such as the building of a border wall, the radical right is poised to continue seething over its fears of white genocide. It is fearfully anticipates a multicultural wave washing it out. This anger is heightened as tech companies deplatform extremists, which further frustrates those convinced they are being driven to extinction. As Spencer said last year at one point, say 2 years ago, Silicon Valley really was our friend. That what has happened in terms of the Silicon Valley attack on us are just really bad, as extremists are pushed farther to the margins online. This rage will likely grow. Given these trends, there are no signs that the violence, which has been too common over the past 2 decades, will let up. In fact, if the hate movement abandons politics as a solution to demographic change, a recent denazification of Trump by prominent white supremacists seemed to indicate more angry lone wolves like Bauer may see violence as a solution. Regardless of Trump's future fortunes, Trumpism, a form of race-based populism, is likely to be with us for many years to come as the nation continues to come to terms with its changing demographics and the impact of globalism. Tracked 1,020 hate groups. Active hate groups in the United States, 2018. In 2018, the number of hate groups surged to 1,020, an all-time high. There's a snapshot from the 2018 hate group listing. White nationalists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. Much of the energies on the radical right this year was concentrated in the white supremacist milieu after a lull that followed the violence in Charlottesville, which brought criminal charges and civil suits and temporarily dampened the radical right's activism and organizing. Newer groups gathered momentum. White supremacist groups birthed in the age of Trump, meaning after he announced his run for presidency in June 2015, have thrived. Identity Evropa, a white nationalist group that tries to dress up its racism under the label identitarianism, saw its chapter count rise for the third year in a row, from 1 in 2016 to 15 in 2017 to 38 in 2018. The white nationalist blog and broadcasting site The Right Stuff started with 4 chapters in 2016 and now has 34. And the Right Stuff shoot-off focused on creating an independent South identity Dixie, which only began in 2017, has 7 chapters now. The violent neo-Nazi organization Atomwaffen Division, whose members are allegedly associated with as many as 5 known killings since May 2017, grew from one group in 2017 to 27 in 2018. The Southern Poverty Law Center was able to document that growth, in part because of the reporting efforts of ProPublica and Rolling Stones, which helped push the secretive small groups of young men farther into public view. The number of Ku Klux Klan charters continues to fall for the 3rd year in a row, down to 51 charters in 2018 from 130 in 2016. The KKK has not been able to appeal to younger races with its antiquated traditions, old dress, and lack of digital savvy. Younger extremists prefer David Perry polo shirts and khakis to Klan robes. It may be that the KKK, having somewhat endured since 1866, is finally on its last leg. Black nationalism. Black nationalism hate groups make up about a quarter of the total of the hate groups chapters in 2018. This sector has been growing for several years and continued to do so last year, with an increase from 233 chapters in 2017 to 264 in 2016. Even the group, even with the growth, excuse me, black nationalist groups lag far behind the vast majority of groups that adhere to some form of white supremacist ideology. Typically anti Semitic, anti LGBT, and anti white, these groups have been expanded in reaction to rising white supremacy, Trump's emboldening of racists, and the administration's sharp turn away from police reform and civil rights. Trump calling African nations shitholes and attacking NFL players added more fuel to the fire. To capitalize on these events, the new Black Panther Party held a rally in Houston last year against the KKK and Trump, and the group's 2018 conference included a rally in front of the White House praising Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, denouncing Trump and calling for their own territory. In November, Farrakhan compared Trump to Satan. Regardless, the environment for black nationalist groups is categorically different than it is for white hate groups. Unlike white hate groups, those champions found themselves in influential White House positions over the past 2 years. Black nationalists have little or no impact on mainstream politics and no defenders in high office. Anti-government movement. The anti-government patriot movement saw its number decline in 2018, likely due to friendly federal governments that still serve as traditional roles as movement sworn enemy. The number of such groups fell by 12%, from 689